Before you scroll, pause. Because what you're about to hear is the quiet truth every child carries in their heart. A child who grows up scared of their parents doesn't speak up, they shrink. They don't rebel, they disappear inside themselves. Their fear doesn't fade with time, it grows with them. And the damage it causes, it shows up years later, in ways no parent ever intended. When a child grows up scared of their parents, the fear they carry becomes the lens through which they view the entire world. They wake up each day not wondering what they will learn, but wondering what they must avoid. Their mind becomes trained to predict danger. The tone of a parent's footsteps, the shift in their voice, the silence that comes before anger. Instead of developing naturally with curiosity and confidence, they develop with caution. Every action feels like a test they're terrified to fail. And in that environment, love becomes something they have to earn, not something they feel they deserve. When a parent uses fear, even unintentionally, the child begins to believe that affection is conditional and can disappear at the slightest mistake. The child learns survival, not connection. They're constantly scanning for signs of disappointment, constantly preparing themselves for the next scolding, the next outburst, the next moment that will make them feel small. Their brain becomes wired to manage stress, not joy. They start to behave perfectly not because they want to, but because they're afraid of what will happen if they don't. And slowly, they lose parts of themselves in the process. Their spontaneity, their playfulness, their natural confidence. The home becomes a place where their nervous system is always on high alert. Even during calm moments, a part of them waits for the next emotional storm. As they grow, they begin to misunderstand what love is supposed to feel like. Instead of warmth, they associate love with pressure. Instead of safety, they associate love with tension. They start believing that the people who care about them are the same people who can hurt them the most. This confusion follows them into adulthood. They struggle to trust because fear conditioned them to hide. They struggle to speak up because fear taught them that honesty leads to conflict. They struggle to be vulnerable because they never learned how to feel safe in someone's presence. The emotional imprint left by childhood fear becomes a pattern that repeats itself in relationships, friendships, and even in their own parenting someday. The saddest part is that the parent often doesn't realize what's happening. They may believe they're disciplining, teaching, or helping their child toughen up, but fear never builds strength, it builds walls. A scared child doesn't grow into a confident adult. They grow into someone who doubts themselves at every step, someone who hides their pain, because they learned early that speaking up isn't safe. They become adults who apologize too much, who feel guilty for having needs, who panic when someone raises their voice. The truth is, fear doesn't disappear with age, it transforms into anxiety, people-pleasing, or emotional distance. And it all begins in those early years when a child learned to survive instead of feel loved. When a child is scared of their parents, communication slowly dies long before anyone notices. At first, the child tries to speak, tries to explain, tries to ask questions, but each harsh reaction, each angry tone, each dismissive comment teaches them one lesson: silence is safer. So they begin to withhold little things. How their day went, what bothered them, what made them happy. They stop sharing their small worries because they fear being blamed. They stop sharing their excitement because they fear being shut down. Eventually, their inner world becomes a locked room, and the parents are completely unaware of how many doors have quietly closed. A scared child learns to study their parents' mood before speaking. They rehearse sentences in their mind, checking and double checking if this is the right moment to talk. But there is no right moment when a child lives with fear. And after enough failed attempts, they stop trying altogether. They begin to answer in one-word responses, avoiding eye contact, avoiding vulnerability, avoiding any situation where their voice might trigger a reaction. Communication becomes mechanical, not emotional. They'll tell you they ate. They'll tell you their homework is done, but they will never tell you how they feel. Because feelings are dangerous in a home where fear exists. As silence grows, misunderstandings grow even faster. A parent might think the child is becoming rebellious, withdrawn, or too quiet. But the truth is simpler and far more heartbreaking. The child has learned that their thoughts aren't welcome. Their frustrations aren't safe, and their mistakes are not allowed. Instead of asking for help, they hide their problems. Instead of admitting when something hurts, they bury it. And over time, the parent loses access to the emotional world of their own child. The distance becomes bigger, colder, and harder to fix. This lack of communication shapes the child's emotional development. They never practice expressing themselves, so they grow up struggling to put their feelings into words. When something hurts them, they freeze. When someone crosses a boundary, they stay quiet. When they need support, they don't know how to ask. They learn to protect themselves through silence, and silence becomes a habit they carry into adulthood. They fear disappointing others. Fear confrontation, fear that speaking honestly will lead to rejection or anger, because that's what childhood taught them. The tragedy is that all of this could have been prevented if the child had felt safe enough to speak. Communication doesn't disappear overnight. It fades slowly with every moment the child feels unheard or unsafe. And once that silence becomes their comfort zone, it takes years to unlearn. They grow into adults who talk less, trust less, and share less. Not because they have nothing to say, but because childhood fear taught them that their voice doesn't matter. When a child grows up scared of their parents, something inside them shifts. The people who were supposed to be their safest place slowly become the people they fear the most. A parent is meant to be a shield, someone a child runs toward when the world feels overwhelming. But a scared child does the opposite. They don't run toward their parents, they hide from them. They don't feel protected, they feel exposed. Home becomes unpredictable, and unpredictability is the birthplace of fear. Even if the parent isn't physically harmful, emotional tension alone is enough to make a child feel unsafe. Their nervous system is constantly preparing for the next correction, the next disapproving look, the next moment they're made to feel like a burden. In that environment, the parent becomes a source of stress rather than comfort. A child's brain is wired to seek safety above everything else. When they sense anger, harshness, or emotional distance, their body responds as if they're in danger. Their heart races, their stomach tightens, and their mind tries to decode the situation. They start tiptoeing around the parent, adjusting their behavior to avoid triggering anything. They laugh quietly, walk softly, and ask for less. Not because they want to, but because fear has taught them that being invisible is the safest option. Their home becomes a place where their body is never fully relaxed, where their guard is always up. Instead of feeling protected, they're constantly protecting themselves. This shift alters how they see authority figures and relationships in general. When a child's first experience of authority is someone who scares them, they learn to associate power with fear. They believe that the people who care for them are also the ones who can hurt them. And that belief follows them into adulthood. They may struggle to trust mentors, teachers, or bosses. They may become overly obedient, terrified of conflict, or terrified of making mistakes. Their fear doesn't stay confined to childhood. It becomes the template for every relationship where someone has influence over them. The emotional damage is subtle, but deep. A child who fears their parents doesn't tell them when they're bullied. They don't tell them when they're hurt. They don't tell them when they're struggling. Because they don't view their parents as protectors. They view them as threats. Not threats in the sense of physical danger, but threats to their emotional safety. They don't want to be judged, dismissed, or punished for being human. So they keep their pain hidden, even when they desperately need help. And the heartbreaking part is that fear blocks love. A child cannot feel close to someone they fear. They may respect their parents, obey them, and even admire parts of them. But they cannot feel safe with them. They will always keep a distance, a barrier, a quiet fear that stops them from fully bonding. When parents become sources of fear instead of security, the foundation of the relationship fractures. And even when the child grows up, that early fear still echoes in their heart, shaping how they trust, how they connect, and how they love. When a child grows up scared of their parents, the fear doesn't stay trapped in childhood. It quietly follows them into every relationship they form later in life. A child who learns to associate closeness with tension starts to misunderstand what love is supposed to feel like. They grow up thinking that love involves walking on eggshells, keeping quiet to keep the peace, or earning affection by being good enough. So when they enter adulthood, they don't look for relationships that feel safe and gentle. They gravitate toward the ones that feel familiar, even if familiar means unhealthy. Fear becomes their emotional language, and they learn to navigate connection through caution rather than trust. This early fear often turns into one of two extremes. Some grow into adults who fear intimacy altogether. Opening up feels dangerous because vulnerability once led to pain or punishment. They hold their emotions tightly, avoid deep conversations, and push people away the moment things get too close. Their partners may describe them as distant, cold, or hard to read. But they're not cold. They're scared. Scared of being judged. Scared of disappointing someone. Scared of reliving the same fear they felt as a child. To them, closeness means exposure, and exposure means risk. So they protect themselves by staying one step back, keeping a quiet barrier between themselves and everyone else. Others take the opposite path. Instead of fearing intimacy, they tolerate unhealthy behavior because it feels normal. If they grew up with criticism, they're drawn to people who criticize them. If they grew up with emotional distance, they accept partners who pull away. If they grew up trying to please their parents, they become adults who overgive in relationships, hoping that affection won't be taken away. Their childhood fear conditions them to believe that love is something you survive, not something that nourishes you. They overlook red flags because discomfort feels familiar. They ignore their own needs because they were taught early that their feelings don't matter. This pattern often affects friendships too. They may become the friend who always listens, but never shares. The one who apologizes too quickly. The one who avoids saying no, even when they're overwhelmed. They fear conflict because the smallest disagreement reminds them of parental anger. They fear letting people down because they grew up believing mistakes ruin relationships. So they shrink themselves to fit into spaces where they should feel safe, repeating the same emotional patterns that once protected them but now limit them. What makes this even more heartbreaking is that they don't realize where these patterns come from. They think they're just introverted, sensitive, bad at relationships, or too emotional. They don't see that they are simply living out a script written for them in childhood. A script where fear replaced communication, where walking on eggshells replaced confidence, where silence replaced honesty. And until they understand this, they keep attracting situations that reinforce that old fear. The truth is, fear shapes the foundation upon which future relationships are built. A child who was scared of their parents grows into an adult who either fears love or accepts love that hurts. And unless they consciously break the cycle, the emotional imprint of childhood continues to guide their choices long after they've grown up. When a child grows up living in fear, the changes that happen inside them aren't loud or dramatic. They're quiet, internal, and deeply permanent. Fear becomes part of their identity long before they even understand what identity means. Their mind starts shaping itself around survival, not self-worth. Instead of developing a strong sense of, "I am loved," they develop a constant whisper of, "I must be careful." That whisper becomes the background noise of their entire childhood, influencing how they think, how they react, how they see themselves, and how they move through the world. Inside, the child begins to shrink emotionally. They stop trusting their own feelings because every time they expressed them, they were punished, mocked, or ignored. So they learn to numb themselves. They disconnect from their emotions as a form of protection. They stop crying not because they're strong, but because they learned that showing hurt only leads to more hurt. They stop getting excited because excitement draws attention, and attention is unsafe. They stop expressing frustration because frustration invites punishment. Every natural human emotion gets filtered through fear, and the child slowly forgets what it feels like to be emotionally free. This emotional suppression affects their confidence. A child who is constantly scared starts believing their existence is a problem. They start assuming they're always wrong, always in the way, always one mistake away from being yelled at or rejected. Their inner dialogue becomes harsh because they internalize the harshness they grew up around. I'm stupid. I can't do anything right. I don't matter. These beliefs don't disappear with age. They harden. And even when they grow up and enter a much safer environment, that wounded inner child still clings to these old beliefs, still flinches in the presence of disappointment, still panics at the idea of making a mistake. Fear also impacts their ability to trust others. When the people who should have protected them instead became the source of fear, the child learns that love is unpredictable. They begin to expect betrayal, rejection, or anger even when none exists. This makes it hard for them to relax around others, hard to open up, hard to believe that someone can love them without hurting them. Trust becomes something they want, but can't fully give. And this guardedness creates loneliness, even when they are surrounded by people who truly care. Over time, fear even shapes how the child sees the world. They may grow into adults who assume danger where there is none. A raised voice, even if not directed at them, triggers anxiety. A simple disagreement feels like a threat. A small mistake feels like a disaster. Their nervous system has been trained to react as if every situation might hurt them. This constant vigilance becomes exhausting. It affects their mental health, their decisions, their relationships, and even their physical well-being. The most heartbreaking part is that the child often blames themselves for this. They think something is wrong with them, not realizing they are carrying emotional wounds created long before they had the power to protect themselves. What changes inside them isn't just fear. It's the belief that they are unworthy of safety, love, or acceptance. And unless someone helps them heal, That belief becomes the quiet, hidden burden they carry throughout their life. A scared child doesn't just grow out of fear. They grow around it. They shape their entire emotional world to survive it. And even when they become adults, that same fear, small, silent, and deeply rooted, continues to guide the way they think, feel, connect, and live.